Parents. What spooky, past life memory did your kid utter? When my son was 3, he told his mom that he was a cosmonaut the last time he was a grown-up, not an astronaut. The Russian version. We're 99% certain he hadn't heard the word before. My youngest, 4 to 5, would tell about how warm and cozy she was in my belly, how cold and scary it was to be born, and how the hardest part was that she used to know everything, but now she doesn't know anything. I would give her space to talk. Her frustration at almost being able to remember everything was almost palpable. When my daughter was about 3 years old, she would say the word specs all the time, like constantly. I'm thinking, this is so bizarre, why would a child randomly start saying this? Then my wife told me that her grandfather used to work for a company called Specs. The grandfather has been deceased quite a long time and was never even alive since my daughter was born. She used to say things to me all the time like, when I was an adult I used to do XYZ. When my daughter was 3 and starting to talk clearer, was talking to someone and concerned, I walked into the bedroom and no one was there. Initially I thought it was her playing with her toys. Days later the same scenario, but this time I asked who she was talking yo and she replied, your grandma. I thought she meant my mom who had recently passed, so I showed a pic of her and asked, is this her? No, your grandma, was the reply. I found a picture of my grandma and she with a big smile said, yes, her. I was shocked since I don't have pictures of my grandma displayed, and she died 1991 and my daughter born 2015. Edit. Fixed a word. Sort of along these lines. I am 60 years of age, never having biological children, but am the proud grandfather of several wonderful children. I am the adopted one. My lady and I have been together for 28 years and her children have children now. One day my granddaughter, around the age of 4 years old, went to her mother and asked, what happened to Papa babies? There was 2 of them but they're dead now. It so happened that when I was 13 or 14 my girlfriend at the time got pregnant. There was an abortion. My girlfriend always said they were twins. I never really believed her, and never argued the point. I think of this a lot now in my old age. The following conversation happened between my wife and our youngest when she was 3 or 4. Daughter. I remember my old mommy. Wife. A what? Daughter. Like I was born. And then I was really cold. But then I woke up and you were my new mommy. And laid her head on my wife. My youngest was born with complications. She was intubated and spent 2 weeks in the NICU. So there's that. Not a parent. I remember telling my mom when I was about 3 about my royal family. I still have this cryptic memory of standing in a desert with a dark shallow pool. The sun was setting, and my younger brother reaches down and splashes the water in the pool. And everyone got very upset. There was something sacred about this pool. It has always been a lasting memory for me. I met someone when I was 16. And we stayed friends, and when we were 18 we talked about reincarnation. And he told me the exact same story, only from the brother's perspective. I had never told him about my memory. Still freaks me out to this day. When I was about 4 my family and I were moving house. We went to view this house in a rural village that was right by an airfield that had been very important during WW2. And there were still disused Anderson shelters in the garden and fields behind. Apparently the minute I saw them I ran to my mom, clung to her arm and asked, are there going to be more bombs? And got really agitated. Nobody ever spoke about the war. This was in the 90s. And we didn't even have a TV. My mom was really spooked by the whole thing. In 2006 my best friend Nick was Kia in Iraq. We used to wrestle, fight until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death, some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5 and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, where did you learn that? He says, your friend says hi, and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit. I was the child in this case. I don't remember any of this. But when I was 4 we traveled to Ireland to visit my dad's grandparents. We were walking through a shopping area when I started yelling about wanting to see the train and ran into a shop. My parents ran in after me as I was going nuts about some train. There was no train. It was a clothing store. The woman working there asked my parents what I was doing as I was just running around frantically. I finally yelled, the train. I had found, in the back of the store, a framed newspaper clipping from the 1940s of the front window of the shop when it was a toy store, and there was a big model train scene set up. Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, when I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here. And, why were so many people in my room last night? For like 2 years. Update. It had been a while since she said anything like the above. But yesterday at dinner she turned around and looked behind her. Then said, sometimes I hear voices behind me, but when I look back, no one is there. Well, I'm not a parent, but I once told my mother, I used to be your dad. when I was a toddler. And if that's not weird enough, he died about 9 months before I was born. I don't know how old I was, but when I was young, less than 6, I was in the car with my parents and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house. My family and I were driving through the Kent countryside and my brother, about 3 at the time, announced, "Mummy, that was the field I died in once. A bayonet went through my tummy." I was 8 and remember wondering what a bayonet was exactly. At the same time, my parents looked at each other and asked him how he knew what bayonet was. He said he didn't know and then became almost embarrassed and shy because of our collective reactions. There was no way he would have known about war or weapons, as this was the early 90s and we didn't watch TV much at all. I'm a complete skeptic, but this creeps me out to this day. Not me, but some of my grandma's siblings died in a house fire around the 60s to 70s. My mom's sister, around 15 to 25 at the time, was just talking with one of her cousin who was about 5 like 30 years ago, and the 5-year-old was really scared of fire, and acted a lot like one of my grandma's sisters, Tony. Then one day when my aunt reached over to light a candle, the 5-year-old cousin said, "Isn't it funny how last time we were sisters but now we're cousins?" It freaked my aunt right out, apparently. Edit. Forgot to point this out, but 2 of my grandma's sisters died in the fire. One of my preschool students. "What do you want to do when you're a kid again?" Me. "Well, grown-ups don't become kids again. We grow up and stay grown-ups." Her. "Well, I remember when I was a grown-up and I drove a car. And now I'm a kid again." When my daughter was 3, she saw a large ship while we were on vacation at the beach and said, "That's like the one my parents before you died on." I said, "You had other parents before us?" She calmly went on to explain that I shouldn't worry. They were her parents a long time before my husband and I were, but the ship they were on broke apart and they are still at the bottom of the ocean. She then said when her before parents died, she and her sister, Brynella, had to be separated because no one could take them both. She said her sister went to live in Australia, but she stayed in Ireland. We live in the U.S. My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least 1 miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time. Anyone interested in this sort of thing should look up the WW2 U.S. General George S. Patton. He allegedly attributes many of his victories throughout Europe to a familiarity with the battlefields, having fought on them countless times in past lives. I'm pretty sure there's a book about it. Edit. I found the book on Amazon. Amazon.com, Patton Lives Battles General Reincarnation, DP, 1,481,257,439, ref equals D6 Caplink BB Marketplace. Mine said that he had a dream he was in heaven, or some other place before he was born, with lots of men in suits who had lined up every woman on the planet, and the suits told him to pick who would be his mum. The part that creeped me out is I remember my mum telling me I had a dream exactly like that as a child. Aged 2 or 3, my daughter told us about when she and her other parents had to run away from their burning house, but not just their house. Everything around them was on fire. They didn't escape. She also told us how warm and cozy it was in her mother's womb. When he was around 4, my grandson used to talk about his job at the ice factory. One day he was talking about his boss, Farvo, and the day he quit. I asked him why he quit and he turned to me and quite passionately said, "I'll tell you why I quit. They made me work 15 days in a row without a break and I had enough of that." It was weird hearing all that righteous anger coming out of that little boy. Asterisk, my daughter just informed me that he was 3 when he always talked about working at the ice factory. So yeah, scary 3-year-olds. My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3 they had a fire drill and she cried hysterically until it was over and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out. I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born. This comment section taught me something. Never lower your guard around 3-year-olds. Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back. From a message my ex sent me last year about our daughter who was 3 at the time. On hearing a motorbike, I had one before I was little. It went whoosh and then I had no legs and mummy and daddy had to help me but I didn't want to so I went to sleep and now I'm too little. My 5-yo boy has a lot of creepy past life utterings. But the most concerning was when he told me he was going to be replaced soon by a brown girl with long hair. I was driving my family across the state to visit family. Some commercial on the radio about Vegas came on and I started singing, "Viva Las Vegas," in my best Elvis impersonation. My son was about 3 to 4 and he says, "I don't like Vegas. I lost my life and a lot of money there." His mom and I glanced at each other like, WTF? He never said anything else about it. My little brother when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever, just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old. Edit. I appreciate the love. Everyone make sure to say what you need to those who need to hear it. I don't believe it's my place to tell the whole story, and I don't believe this is the forum. So I'll leave this as is. I also want to advocate for professional mental health for those who have experienced the loss of a child, sibling, parent, etc. Don't figure it all out alone, go get help. Not so much past life. When my son was about 4 we were driving to daycare, he randomly pipes and says, "Mommy, I had this dream where you were pregnant." We named the baby Dawson. But then he fell off the bed and died. He wouldn't give me any more information than that. I was super weirded out. That evening I decided to get a couple pregnancy tests, and sure enough I was pregnant. Went through the next day and never mentioned anything to anyone, but the following day I woke up with cramps. Ended up going to the hospital and found out I'd miscarried. Still never said anything to anyone about it. A few days go by and we're driving to daycare and my son says, "Remember that dream I had about the baby? That's silly because you're not pregnant." I was absolutely floored. It was so weird. I don't remember any specifics, but she always talks about back when she was older. She's 4. When my brother was about 3 back in the 90s, our family was sitting down for dinner and he randomly said, "Dad, remember when I lived in Spain? We're from the UK. And my dad, humoring him, said, "Yeah?" And he continued that he lived in Spain before with his other family, but he died when he was on a fishing trip with his dad, and the last thing he remembers is his dad's hand trying to reach him as he drowned. He also reeled off some Spanish names for his parents, which there was no way he would have known those kind of names, and he started to sort of meditate in his room from time to time. He eventually stopped talking about it as he got a little older and doesn't remember anything about it anymore. Crazy to hear so many other people have similar experiences. We named our son after my father, who passed away 3 years before he was born. My father pumped gas at a local gas station for years. My son saw one of the oil trucks drive by one day and proceeded to talk about how he was pumping gas at the gas station. It weirded me right out cause we never talked about that before. He's only 3 years old. Now I'm scared to talk to my 3 years old. My mom said when I was pretty young she was driving me to daycare before work and I told her, "You should have called Irma last night before she died." This was an old coworker she loved. Turns out Irma had died that night. My daughter is about to turn 4 and talks about being in belly a lot. She recalls details and things I did while pregnant that I know I haven't told her or talked about. She talks about the day I rode the school bus to the mini town. I took my students on a field trip when I was nearly 9 months pregnant to a mini city play place. She tells me it was dark, but she heard my heart and heard my voice. My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy, but it's okay. I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers. But they all died. But it's okay BC, I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. Last time she did she was about 3 or 4 years old. Apparently when I was a kid, my dad and I were watching Survivorman. Apparently it was an episode where he was in the woods. And I said something along the lines of, "I got lost in the woods once with friends, but I was never found." I was at a nature show with my daughter, the kind where they bring animals out and tell the audience about them. This particular show was about wolves, and the handler was telling the audience why she did what she did with the wolves. My daughter, maybe 4 at the time, said, "I used to do that." I asked her what she meant. She said, just as factually as a 4-year-old could possibly be, that she used to train dogs and wolves before she died. She herself looked confused for a bit, as though this thought was surprising to her as well. I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Well, that's interesting." She enjoyed the rest of the show and never spoke of it again. Edit. Thank you for the award, Internet Stranger. I'll be sure to pay it forward when I'm able. Not a specific memory, but when I was around 5 I remember being so mad that I couldn't remember who I was before. When I was 3 I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had and the dog too. One day she took me to Target and I told her I wanted big girl undies and she said she would buy them for me and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked. When my sister was a toddler she used to talk about her other mom, who had long black hair and blue eyes and blue shoes. Our mom had a pixie cut and was blonde. Very spooky. My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime he said, "Mama, one time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car." And I said, "What?" And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room and he was hungry and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away and he never got out. That shish. T scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night. When my son was about 3, he told us how he remembered being a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. This was in 1998. When my daughter was 3, she hugged me while she was falling asleep and said I'm her favorite mama. Her. I love you even more than my other mama. Me. Your other mama? Her. Yeah. She died. Me. Oh? Her. She got eaten by rats. Me. Now wide awake. Oh. Her. But it's okay because I cut them open and got her out. Me. Wow. Was she okay? Her. Oh no. She still died. Sweet dreams. Though. Edit. Spaces. When my son was 4 we had driven past a cemetery. He asked me if I remembered when he died and was buried. I said no and asked him what he meant by saying that. He said he had died, was buried in a cemetery and that's when he started growing in my belly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said this. He doesn't remember say this. My middle son, 5, is named after my wife's grandfather. He just looked at her a couple of weeks ago and said, "I remember when you were little and you sat on my lap." He also once gazed into my mother-in-law's eyes, at 3 to 4 years old, stroked her cheek and said, "My daughter." My son was little, about 4 years, and he was playing with his toys and talking. I asked him, "Who are you playing with?" He replied with my sister's name. My sister died when I was young. When my nephew was about 3 or 4 my sister said he was throwing a tantrum in the car while he was in his car seat and he yelled at her randomly. I waited 100 years to be born. This is gonna be buried, but when I was 3 I asked my mom if she remembered when I was a baby boy named Joshua. I am female. She said no and I explained that I died after falling down the stairs. The crazy part is that my mom had a miscarriage before getting pregnant with me after falling down the stairs. So this is mine. I had a baby doll as a kid, 2 to 3 years old, and named her after a family surname that's French and vaguely feminine. And definitely not something a British kid would usually come up with. Problem was use of that particular family name traces back before even my great-grandparents, when it was lost to a paternal surname, and so was never mentioned in my house. The family tree wasn't even being worked on at the time. I still wonder about it. I don't have kids but when my brother was a toddler he said something to my mom about throwing hay in the window for the horses. My grandfather died before his birth and was a farmer. The barn had windows and he would just throw the hay in the windows for the horses to eat. My mom was really freaked out but he never said anything else similar again. My middle son used to talk about having a different mom before me. He would say she was blonde and looked nice but wasn't nice. He would bring it up randomly and only ever got a bit emotional when he would tell me that when he was with her he never got to grow up. He said he chose me to be his mom this time because I would let him grow up and get old. When he would say the last part it was as if he was looking for reassurance. He'd ask me like, "Right, Mom, I can grow up this time?" Really frocked me up sometimes. Not exactly what you asked, but my granddaughter, when she was about 3, told me she dreamed about her sister. She only has brothers. Who was just this big, holding her thumb and finger about a half-inch apart. She doesn't know her mother had a miscarriage before she was born. My parents don't use Reddit so I'll answer this for them. I think I was 3 playing with a corkscrew when I blurted out that I used to have one of these when I had black hair. I'm blonde. My parents said they asked me what it was and I responded that it's used for opening wine. Freaked the hell out of them. My daughter, 2, is absolutely terrified of the sound of planes. She's never been in Onis, just really scared of the sound. Usually, she will hear one and come running and hide between my legs. One night a few months ago, though, she heard a plane, stopped playing and just said to herself, "They're here." A couple weeks later, she told my husband it was time to storm the beach. This kid has never been to a beach. My mom told me when I was 3 or 4 that I cried when we passed an old blue Volkswagen Bug. I told her that was the car I died in. It was apparently very hot and I had a baby in my belly. Answer for my parents. When I was 4 my parents and I went to my aunt's farm. The wind started picking up and I looked back at my parents and said, "Gotta tie the hay bale down in the wind." That's how David died. To this day no one knows who David is. My son said once, "Mommy, when I was big and you were little, I remember when we danced in the kitchen. The only person I ever danced in a kitchen with as a child was my grandfather. I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family, who all had straight, dark hair. His is blonde and curly now, and that he had a mom and a dad and he had had a brother until he went too far into the desert too close to dark and got eaten by, not dogs, not wolves but smaller." I said, "Coyotes?" And he kind of mouthed the word and said, "Oh, that's what you call them." Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore, so we had lunch and that was the first and last time he mentioned it. My son was 2 but nearly 3 and just yammering away talking. Just any old words constantly. It was like he was practicing making sounds 24/7. One day, we are in the car and he is weirdly quiet, not asleep, just sort of daydreamy. I say, "What's up, T?" And he says, "I'm just sad. I miss my birds." "What birds?" "Tutu and Tinga. I don't know who those birds are." T. "It wasn't now, Mommy. It was before, when I had another mommy." "And you had birds? Like as pets?" "No. They lived in a tree next to our house at the edge of the jungle. So they visited me. They were friends, not pets." And he sounded so not too. He sounded like he was grown. And then he fell asleep in his car seat and wouldn't talk about the jungle and the birds when he woke up. My nephew, around 2 or 3, would talk about his other mom, and then look confused when you asked him to elaborate. "She's not here now." Didn't believe in ghosts and sit until this day, but it's fair to say that now I have a slightly more open mind. Our 2/3-year-old daughter was playing on her own, but like she was playing hide and seek with an imaginary friend. Asked, "Are you playing hide and seek?" She said, "Yes." "Who are you playing with?" "Uncle Andrew." My wife's brother Andrew was 7 when he drowned when my wife was 5. Didn't like to talk about it, so we never mentioned it. This was told to me by my parents. When I was 6 or so, my dad was watching a war documentary and it talked about a tube. I then said, "You mean the tube from when I was a grown-up?" My dad asked me to explain more and I said, "Me and another person was put in a tube with a knife and was tasked to kill the other person, but I got stabbed in the chest. He says it still keeps him up at night." Edit. Holy frock, I didn't expect this to blow up as much as it did. Thanks, kind strangers. According to my dad, when I was around 5 I was staring out of the window during a heavy thunderstorm. When he asked me what I was doing, I answered, "When do the bombs drop? Are they gone yet?" I grew up in Germany, and my dad's dad used to alert the city for incoming air raids. My grandpa died 3 days before I was born, and at 5 I had no idea about the war. Or my grandpa. Really freaked him out at the time. A couple moments later I forgot what I said when he asked me more questions. I adopted a Tenno baby from a kind of little talked about country. When he was about 4, he told me he remembered details of a famine, said he would go hungry to feed his siblings. At the time he didn't have any, and his mother would cry as she picked at dirt to get food. It sounded like a strange dream, but we did some research and it lined up with a famine that happened in his birth country. My son is 9 now. When he was just starting to learn to talk, perhaps around 18 months old, a relative bought him a toy monkey. He insisted on calling it Ganga, so much so that I googled it. OMG. Do you remember? UK, memory, Ganga. Ganga. A toy monkey from the 70s, 80s. He was born in 2011. Edit. For everyone asking, he didn't just babble it once, he repeatedly said it, like, Ganga 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 Ganga, whenever he saw it. I had never heard it called that. I never had one. He hadn't seen Donkey Kong, etc. Not really sure if this is a past life memory, but my mom told me as a young kid I had all these memories of my grandpa and could describe him perfectly down to all these quirks and habits only close family knew. It wouldn't be weird except he died literally the day before I was born and my family never really talked about him much after due to grief. My mom said as a young kid I always insisted, "I've met him before." To this day I always have felt like I knew him despite never meeting. My coworker has a son who, when he was about 3, told her he used to grow rice and lived in a place where 2 rivers met. He was able to name the rivers, and she located it on a map of East Asia. Pretty wild. My little brother was born just after 9/11. When he was a toddler one time, he went on about how he used to work in a tall building and wore a suit and tie. Freaked my parent out. Not quite past life stuff, but when I was a toddler and would babble on and on, my mom caught me once taking about my sister and how I had a little sister and how we would play games together. I didn't have a little sister, but I did have a twin that died in utero. It freaked my mom out because she never mentioned my twin to me, but in a weird way she found it kind of comforting. We used to joke that our firstborn looked just like my grandmother who passed away almost exactly a year before she was born. But then again, all babies look like my grandmother with the no teeth and big puffy cheeks, and also we didn't think much of it. But one night when she was less than a year old, don't remember more specifically than that, she was really upset and would not calm down no matter what I did. At one point I said out loud, "Wow, you really do look like Grandma Hayden." She immediately stopped crying, and slowly turned her head to look at me with this look of recognition on her face. Biggest chills I ever got in my life right there. Am I late? My son, when he was 3 years old, started saying some gibberish that sounded very Russian. He told me it was a lullaby from Moscow. He said it like that. I googled a phonetic spelling and found an old Russian lullaby, and that gibberish was the name and chorus of the song. We live in the USA. We are not Russian. I asked his teachers if they were learning about Russia or sang any world music, lullabies, but no one knew anything. Such a mystery. I can't for the life of me remember the song now. I may have written it down, but I'm gonna say chances I find it now are slim to none. Was watching an old video of a jazz drummer playing a solo. No idea who it was, but he was really good. My daughter, probably age 3, was looking over my shoulder for a minute before she said, "I used to play the drums like that when I was a man." Edit. When I got up this morning this had blown up. Thanks for the awards and hilarious comments. My daughter is the one who deserves an award, so I will pass it on. Unfortunately, she no longer has any recollection of making that statement or playing drums. But she is a very musical person, and I'm hoping she stays that way. I used to tell my dad all about conversations I had with my grandfather, who had died exactly a year before I was conceived. He said I used to tell him things my grandfather told me that were totally true, but that I'd have no way of knowing. One day he asked me where I learned this, and I told him I hung out with my grandfather before I was born. None of mine have. But back pre-pandemic I was watching my friend's then 3-year-old for her, and he saw a big military ship, and he got this kind of faraway look and said, "I remember when my boat sank. There were so many sharks." I said, "What?" He blinked, said what, and then started asking questions about the boat. I mentioned it to my friend and she said, "Yeah, he does that sometimes." So this was a few years ago when Lil Dude was 5. He's sitting at the table with us, eating a bowl of Cocoa Pops, when he looks up and says, "There was a ghost floating over my bed last night." Surprised, I asked him, "Did it do anything, or say anything?" Little guy looks me dead in the eye and tells me, "The ghost told me that Kiss used to rock."